You are connected, and you are listening to Specifically for Seniors, the podcast for those in the Remember When generation. Today's podcast is available everywhere you listen to podcasts and with video at Specifically for Seniors YouTube channel. Now, here's your host, Dr. Larry Barsh.
Today's podcast on Specifically for Seniors is going to be a little bit different from other podcasts we've had. Today, my guests are Dr. Xiaosi Gu and Daniela Schiller, who are going to ask you to be part of a cutting-edge social neuroscience experiment on an app they've developed. Don't worry, there's no score, there's no names. Dr. Gu is an associate professor of psychiatry and neuroscience and director of the Center for Computational Psychiatry at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, and is one of the foremost researchers in the area of computational psychiatry. Tell us a bit about yourself and exactly what computational psychiatry is.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me, Larry. Computational psychiatry is a really new field, and the goal is to really make mental health symptoms and trackable with quantitative methods. So we all know that the brain is responsible for most aspects of what we do, and it turns out that we can now use mathematical tools to help us really quantify what the brain does, how the brain does what it does, right? And a very important function of the brain, of course, is that it's kind of responsible for our mood, our well-being. And, this is a particular area that has sort of attracted a lot of attention lately with sort of, the new scientific findings from a slightly older field called computational neuroscience. And now we're taking these tools to specifically help us understand what is mental health and how can we better improve, mental health intervention and treatment.
And Dr. Daniela Schiller is a professor of psychiatry and neuroscience, also at the Icahn School of Medicine. Daniela, tell us a bit about yourself and the work you do.
Thank you, Larry. It's great to be here. My lab works on affective neuroscience. That means we are studying the neural basis of emotions, for example, why we are afraid, or how we respond to rewards and so forth, and also social cognition. How do we interact with other people?
So you've developed a couple of games. Tell us about the games.
So in real life, what we do is interact with other people. It's a very basic function that we do daily. And in fact, most of human inventions are based on collaboration and interaction with other people. So it's really surprising that we know very little about how the brain is processing that information, because when we interact, we have a lot of information. In the lab, typically, to study social interactions, it doesn't really mimic everyday life, because usually we would show images or describe people and ask people to evaluate them and then see how the brain is responding. So there is a great need to make it more naturalistic, mimic everyday life. And this is the purpose of the games that we developed. For example, we developed what you call a social navigation game. There you meet fictional characters and you interact with them through a narrative. You're like the protagonist in a story, and it's like a choose your own adventure game. And you interact with them, but we built a story such that we could very accurately compute information and see how the brain is tracking that information. And we describe it almost like a geometric model that has dimensions, for example, how much power or hierarchy you have in that social environment and how close you are to different characters. So from this, we can build this geometric model and quantify the social relationships and then link it to social functioning.
Xiaosi, do you have
Yeah,
any?
of course. So we also developed a game for this app called Social Controllability, and in the app it's called Hardball. So it's a very specific type of approach to study social cognition that comes from the field of behavior economics, actually. So it turns out that behavioral economists have developed various tools involving, usually under the disguise of monetary exchange between two players. And we can use kind of the numbers, right? For example, dollar amount to track how the two people are interacting with each other. So this is really kind of the essence of this game. So it's a money-based task, but of course the ultimate goal is not to study like money-based decision making per se, right? It's really more about social interaction and just using this monetary exchange as a way to track the interaction. The specific concept we're interested in is actually has to do with what Daniela just said, and specifically it's about social influence. And you can imagine that in many aspects of our social world, a big part, I think, that influences a lot of our social decisions might be, what do you think is fair and how you might use your decisions to influence other people, right? And I think this type of influence can in many ways make us feel good, right? Because it's kind of a sense of control and a sense of agency, so to speak. And when you lose that control, when you very often can lead to mental health symptoms. And we've already observed that, across various disorders. So that's kind of the gist of this second game.
You also had a couple of surveys in there as well. What do they do?
Yeah, we use surveys that are standard in the field of mental health, for example, about anxiety in general or depression, and some more specific about social functioning. And in this way, we can characterize the people that play the app and then link the way they self-report their own behavior and assessment with their behavior in the game. And that's how we gain information from the game behavior, and we can later on use it as a diagnostic and possibly treatment tool.
Yeah, like Daniela said, I think these are very conventional instruments to measure mental health. We don't want to maybe spoil it too much for your audience. Try to balance both between the sort of the scientific background, but as well as the novelty for everyone if you're interested in downloading it. Yeah.
The app is called, quote, the Social Brain app, close quote. Excuse me. I tried to enter it as the social brain. Social brain, it doesn't get to your app. It has to be called the Social Brain app. What do you mean by a social brain?
Specifically, when we talk about the social brain, we talk about the computations and the representations that the brain is doing for social information. You can think about social interaction as a very complicated problem. You have a lot of information. You learn about other people, you have to remember, you need to make decisions, you need to decide whether to approach or avoid, and so forth. So you can think about it as an information processing problem. So by examining what we call the social brain, we really focus on these processes of computations of social information.
Yeah, so actually you could even say that the whole brain is really social, right? Especially for humans, because we've moved way beyond the stage where we have to use most of our brain resources to to hunt, to look for shelter, for these very basic needs. But instead, a modern human being today, when the moment that they were born, they're mostly dealing with, I would say, social relationships, really. And that's why I think that the fact that the human brain is so complex and is able to, represent very like different types of social signals, and learn these social processes very quickly, kind of tells us that across sort of this, evolution of biology, that our brain has really adapted specifically for this purpose. Yeah, but of course, it's like I said, because it's the most complex function that humans have to deal with. Of course, it still has to rely on like very basic functions, like you have to be able to see things or hear things, right? You have to remember people's names. You have to be able to pay attention to people when they're talking. So these basic processes are still very important because they serve as the sort of the building blocks for complex social function.
Are humans the only ones with a social brain?
Absolutely not. Social abilities are preserved across species and developed throughout evolution. But the way we define social can change. That's kind of a philosophical question. What is social and how do we approach it? So in animals, usually we talk about reproductive bonds and hierarchy structure. You can see species that are more social than others, like non-human primates are very social and they have very clear hierarchies, and other species. So the social brain is something that is also being studied in animals that are not human.
Yeah, absolutely. That there's lots of both anecdotal observation, right? You can call your dog, also a social species as well. But also there's lots of scientific research on sort of the different social behaviors across different species. So many intelligent species do have very complex social functions as well. Mm-hmm.
You touched on this slightly before. Most of this research is usually done in a laboratory, but you turn to an app that people now are familiar with. Why?
Laboratory research is limited to the number of participants from your own environment that you invite to the lab or that are able to participate in a study. And these are usually small samples, like 30 people, 40 people. And usually it's not representative because it's limited to location. With the app, that really extends our reach to what we can truly say is a general population. It's not limited, it's not screened, and various people from all walks of life can download and assess. And that's heterogeneity in research is extremely important for scientific interpretation and understanding of the results.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think studying behavior in the wild, is very important for neuroscientists actually. And actually, before we started this recording today, I just received some fresh analysis from my postdoc, really proving the idea that Daniela just mentioned, that we are definitely reaching a very interesting and much more diverse sample than we ever were able to do with the lab. Like, for example, actually we have a really good representation of seniors already.
Really?
Yeah, which we almost never have, right? Like in a typical laboratory study, just because we typically have these, young college or grad students in their 20s and 30s to participate. That's very, very exciting for us. Yeah.
Well, I think part of it during these last couple of years, especially for seniors, we've all been in isolation. Some don't have anybody else living in the house with them, which was one of the reasons I started the podcast, just to have a place where seniors could listen to other people talking. how has this social isolation affected us mentally?
But it is a wonderful initiative, this podcast, and thank you for doing that. So we can think about social isolation almost like sensory deprivation. Your brain needs sensory information to function. We live on it, right? We need light, we need touch, we need the right temperature. So if you don't see other people, you are deprived of very critical information. If you take the kind of the idea of navigation, you can think about social others as reference points. Compared to other people, you can assess your state, you can understand that you're in the same state, for example, like other people, or how different you are. It really allows you to understand your own experience. And if with isolation, you get lost, kind of your mind kind of expands, and it's very hard to understand. So it is critical, social relationships in everyday life.
Yeah, and I want to really talk specifically about also COVID, right, in relation to today's topic, because I think we probably all still have very vivid memories of how initially, and even until now, most of the focus on seniors is really about the direct infection and the potential risk it'll bring to your health. I think it's very rarely talked about the sort of the secondary harm, which is the strict control in the later part of the pandemic, and how many nursing homes actually absolutely refuse people to even visit, right? Even with caution, like they almost refuse to like take evidence in a way. So I have like very specific examples of that, because we lost actually three elderly people in the family the past 2 years, and it's not because of COVID per se, but instead their brain function quickly deteriorated after many months of no visitation. And I mean, as a scientist, I know that we can't do like a controlled experiment on that. Like, it's very hard to prove whether it's really, or it's just because their brain has run its course. And, of course, they were in their 90s. All three of them were in their 90s. But I think that if I were to, make any recommendation for, families at least, is to kind of really recognize the importance of having social contact with seniors during this very important period, because the direct infection disease related health problems are not the only problems we have to deal with. And there is now a delayed so-called mental health pandemic, right? That is just kind of surfacing for various age groups, but particularly for seniors in the past 2 years. Yeah.
Have there been, getting back to your particular study, have there been similar studies in the past?
Using the app, or using social, or look at social brain?
To look at social brain.
The social brain field is a rapidly growing field. In the last, say, 10 or 15 years, it is grew dramatically. There are several societies and conferences several times a year. So there are many studies that are investigating various aspects of social functioning. Where we come, and this particular app is in focusing on tasks that are very naturalistic and also proactive. You dynamically act and interact, and this is what we measure.
Yeah, I would say that most studies so far are focusing on like the basic building blocks, as I mentioned before, like, processing other people's face, for example, or processing other people's voice. And they tend to, really represent the more sensory and motor aspects of social interaction. But here we're really trying to model sort of this very dynamic nature of social relationships, right? And they can change really from moment to moment.
So it's more of a comprehensive study of total social interaction rather than specific portions of it.
Yeah, we're able to capture and quantify complex social behavior.
What's your ultimate goal in treatment or in intervention with the data you're collecting?
I would say the ultimate goal is understanding how social information processing is occurring. What we could do with that is develop treatments that are more personally tailored to individual participants. That would be one aspect. The other is to provide with individuals information that they could understand and analyze their own behavior and behave accordingly. So overall, we would like to develop treatment and diagnostic tools that are currently missing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we already saw that across different types of mental health conditions that we've studied so far, that they do show very different sort of patterns of deficits using these games. So the goal is to really expand that, right? Like into a much more diverse, as we mentioned, a much more diverse sample with this app. Hopefully can guide more personalized treatment in the future.
You don't collect any personal information from participants in this?
No, it's completely anonymous.
Just some general demographic?
Yep, general demographics and some self-report, but it is anonymous. We just link it to these reports without knowing who the person is or anything about that person.
How can people participate?
Well, you go to the App Store, either Android or Apple, and you search for the Social Brain app, and then you will see this little icon of a human face or a human head on a blue background. You will also see that it is linked with Mount Sinai. This will lead you to participate in the games.
It's available both Android and iPhone.
Yes.
And Apple, rather. I want to emphasize again, and I'll write it down right under the screen, the Social Brain app is the name of your app. Mm-hmm. Anything else we haven't covered about it?
Well, I think I just want to say that, again, for the listening audience, we would really encourage everyone to download and play our games. And I think that also, just to generally speaking, recognize the importance of social interaction for our mental health. Call your friends and, go out to meet people, of course, in a safe way. And social interactions are such a big part of our life, and it's one of the most important rewards, right? Despite the fact that, of course, sometimes they might make us feel stressful, right? We all have stressful relationships, but in most cases, just engaging in social interactions itself can really help your brain and help you stay mentally healthy.
Also, one thing I can add is that the reason this audience is very important to us is that we would like to understand social functioning throughout the lifespan. So we want to focus on the entire age range, and senior population are the most experienced. They're undergoing significant changes, and that could really promote research and understanding.
When do you anticipate your research being complete?
Well, the research is comprised of multiple studies. Different studies cover different aspects, and altogether it converges onto the broad picture. So I anticipate we will proceed with that for many years now. But every few months, we hope to release some piece of information that we understand and some piece of the puzzle.
Will you let us know so we can advise people who have participated from this conversation?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. This has been fun. It's been great. Thank you both for coming on.
Thank you again, Larry.
Yeah. Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you.
If you found this podcast interesting, fun, or helpful, tell your friends and family, and click on the follow or subscribe button. We'll let you know when new episodes are available. You've been listening to Specifically for Seniors. We'll talk more next time. Stay connected.